My name's Kent Hughes. I run a program here at the Wilson Center on America and the global economy. Let me, for those of you who are new to the Wilson Center, let me just say a word about how the Wilson Center was founded and the very special mission that Congress gave us. When Congress wanted to honor Woodrow Wilson, they decided against one more monument or one more marble statue on the mall and instead created this living memorial. And the assignment they gave the center was to bring together both sides of Wilson's life. As you may know, he was the only president to have had a PhD. And in his era, he was a very prominent political scientist. He went on then to be, of course, president of Princeton before he was lured into politics as first governor of New Jersey and then two-term president of the United States. Today, we are going to focus on the complementary subjects of innovation and entrepreneurship. And I want to make a special thanks to the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation that really has made today's program possible. Our plan for today is to have opening remarks by Congressman Jared Polis, and I'll introduce him in just a moment. We'll then have a panel of experts on the broader question of innovation and entrepreneurship, followed by a panel looking at the particular role that intellectual property protection plays in fostering, supporting, and perhaps at times retarding entrepreneurship. I do want to mention that I got a note this morning from Tom Khalil, who you may know is our Deputy Director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy and also is part of the staff of the National Economic Council. And Tom asked me to remember what he would have said were he here, something about the Startup America initiative by the Obama administration, which has been matched then by a Startup America partnership by a group of private sector entrepreneurs. This is something that I sense has become really a priority in both parties and in both sides of Capitol Hill. So our hope is that today's program can help inform and perhaps support efforts to facilitate entrepreneurship in the United States. Well, it is now my great pleasure to introduce Congressman Jared Polis. Congressman Polis is in his second term representing the 2nd District of Colorado. That includes Boulder, Colorado, which is itself a hotbed of entrepreneurship. In many ways, I think you could describe the congressman as a serial entrepreneur. He co-founded his first company while still an undergraduate at Princeton. It was the first of many entrepreneurial steps. Well, as you know, the tiger is the Princeton mascot. And in an era when we are hearing a great deal about tiger moms, you could say that the congressman is something of a tiger entrepreneur. The congressman went on to found several more companies, 2 charter schools. In one of the charter schools, he served as the superintendent. Not surprisingly, he has been named Entrepreneur of the Year by Ernst & Young. Education remains a top priority for the congressman. His first elective office was actually to the Colorado State Board of Education. And in the Congress, he's continued to follow that passion with a whole series of legislative proposals and initiatives. He now serves on the powerful House Rules Committee. As you know, any legislation of any consequence goes through the House Rules Committee before it goes to the floor. He's also on the Democratic Steering and Policy Committee and a regional whip for the Colorado and Mountain West area. And yet another step that he has taken recently is to co-found the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Caucus. Congressman, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Congressman has to get back for a vote shortly, so I ask him to make a few remarks, and if there's time, he'll take 1 or 2 questions.
Thank you, Kent. Appreciate that. And hello. Thank you. Hello to the millions of web viewers out there today. You can follow me at Jared Polis on Twitter, or you can like my Congressman Jared Polis Facebook page and keep track of what we're up to here. You know, Woodrow Wilson was the president of my alma mater, as you mentioned, Princeton University, and of course, in the mode of college students, we have a building, we have a Woodrow Wilson Public Policy School. We always call it Woody Woo. So I don't know if that's college students always looking for abbreviations. So I kind of automatically went into that mode when I saw that. Oh, I'm going to be over at Woody Woo this morning. Thank you, Kent. I deeply appreciate your very kind introduction. It's exciting to be here at the Woody Woo Center this morning and discussing the role of innovation and entrepreneurship in the economy. What could be more important at any time, but particularly in a time of recession when we need innovation and entrepreneurship to create the jobs of the future in our country. My remarks will be brief, and I'll be happy to take a couple questions as well. One of the obstacles innovation and entrepreneurship in America is the disconnect between all of the politics and many of the policies swirling around our economy and recession, and the real economy confronted by startups and entrepreneurs around the country. There's a conversation that innovators are having in our country about how they can grow their businesses and create jobs, and then there's discussions, or more accurately, heated arguments between Democrats and Republicans in Washington and this town. And frequently there's not enough overlap between the issues that are being discussed by both. The key to American competitiveness in the long run is human capital development. That's what I focus my efforts on in Congress. Really two main areas: education, which is growing our next generation of leaders, workers, citizens, entrepreneurs through our schools here in this country, all the way from early childhood education through higher education, increasingly important in the global economy. And immigration, which is importing the best and brightest and hardest working from around the world, which particularly in the entrepreneurial innovation sector is the critical piece of American competitiveness. There is, however, some good news, and you wouldn't necessarily get it if you read the front page of Politico and Roll Call, thinking all is lost and we're too divided to govern. But beneath the surface, there are a number of bipartisan initiatives that I think speak to innovation and entrepreneurship around the country. Trade policy is one example. We have very strong bipartisan support in Congress to expand the market for U.S. goods and services with pending Panama, Colombia, and Korea trade pacts. President Obama has been committed to completing those and sending those to Congress, and they enjoy very strong bipartisan support in the House and the Senate. Now, the politics surrounding trade have always been complicated, but the current strategy for moving these agreements relating to other initiatives like the Trade Adjustment Authority holds promise for their completion in the near term. Now, obviously, this is something I also said 6 or 12 months ago, and it didn't happen. But nevertheless, I'm very optimistic. I think a greater than 50% chance that in the next 2 or 3 months, those trade agreements will be approved. We also need to strengthen and make permanent the R&D tax credit, another initiative that has bipartisan support in Congress. Basic scientific research, the good news was that was substantially increased through the American Reinvestment Act, ARA. According to the most recent data, NSF provided more than 60% of all federally funded basic research to the nation's colleges and universities, and we all know what an important role they play in the ecosystem of innovation. I represent a district that has the University of Colorado receiving several $100 million of research money. We all, of course, know the critical role that universities, both public and private, universities like Stanford in Northern California, a cluster of universities in Boston, play in the entire startup ecosystem is absolutely critical, and much of that is NSF money. Bipartisan support for NSF has driven to a more than 25% increase in its budget over 10 years. The current year's budget, unfortunately, led to a minor overall reduction in funding, which imperils President Obama's goal of doubling NSF funding over the next 10 years. But what's important in these times of budget cuts is that we seek to preserve the fundamental investments in our future and the innovation economy, and B, we certainly make sure, in the worst-case scenario, that these areas are not singled out for cuts if every area has to do its fair share and have a budget freeze or whatever it is. But we want to make sure there are, of course, there's just as there is a pro-NSF agenda, there's also an anti-science and innovation agenda among some in Congress that would seek to particularly single out some of these funds for more than their fair share of cuts. Another exciting horizon is corporate tax reform, and including repatriation. We have a tremendous opportunity to reform taxes in a way that would benefit startup companies across America. Obviously, the tax code now is very complicated, has many different loopholes, tax expenditures, whatever you want to call them. Those are generally to the benefit of companies that have the ability to hire people here to seek them out. And coming from the startup world, all the companies I've been involved with have always paid 35% corporate tax. I mean, we never knew about these things, and that's just what you pay. So if we have the opportunity to bring it down to 27% on a revenue-neutral basis, that'll effectively be a much lower tax rate for many of the startup companies that pay that rate. Of course, many startups have NOL carry forwards and don't pay taxes for some time, and I've even had companies that have had exits before they've had to pay taxes. But nevertheless, the fastest growing companies, we want them to reinvest in their growth. And it would be nice to tax them at a lower rate so that they can do that, not to mention the global competitiveness argument. We are among the highest corporate tax rate of any country, and the average is closer to 20%. We don't need to be in the bargain basement business. We're not going to be, 1995, come to America. That's not our value proposition. It's quality, it's infrastructure, it's rule of law. But you got to be competitive. That's all. It's all good stuff to have. And on an equal playing field, people will come here. But you got to be competitive. I think 26, 25, 27% would be a huge boom to the innovation economy. On the immigration front, we're working strongly with Representative Zoe Lofgren of California on the IDEA Act. This is a high skills innovation bill that she and I authored that would ensure that U.S. educated immigrants with science, technology, engineering, and math graduate degrees can stay in the U.S. and support the growth of U.S. companies. The IDEA Act also invests the visa fee pays by these Americans in scholarships and grants that support pursuing STEM degrees. It also includes some reforms around the EB-5 and startup visa provisions, which I authored as a standalone bill last year as well. I also recently introduced a Computer Science Education Act, which will help prepare Americans for more than 1.5 million high-wage computing jobs. Again, preparing our own human capital for the jobs of the future, absolutely critical. So the good news is that there is actually some bipartisan agreement on many of the resolutions outlined. The bad news is there's also bipartisan opposition to many of these initiatives as well. And a closer look at our actual policy discussions reveal that there are ideas circulating on both sides of the aisle in Congress that are pro-jobs, pro-innovation, pro-business, and can lead to job creation in a recession and in boom times, and also can lead to America retaining its unique place of leadership in the world in the innovation economy. And with that, I'd be happy to take 2 or 3 questions before I have to run. Yes, thank you. Mm-hmm.
So you'd have multiple answers, and people who aren't necessarily tied in with a particular help, get help from outside of Congress.
It's a great idea. There's 2 components to it. There's a legal element, and there's the fiscal and tax component. So they'd almost be a joint team of MBA students and JD students, I would think, that would be able to have the skill set necessary to do it. Law students and their professors approaching it from the perspective of, if I'm trying to beat this thing, how do I get around this? How do I get around that? Obviously, the numbers have to add up. I think taking politics out of it, we want to approach this in a revenue-neutral way. I mean, there may very well be, Democrats who want to say we want to be more than revenue-neutral, Republicans who say we want this to be a tax cut. But, I think you can take politics out of it and say, let's just find, for whatever level of government revenues you guys agree on, let's find a better way to do it that doesn't have all these disincentives in the economy. So if there's interest among grad schools, there's no formal call, but I'll be happy to do a letter, and I can probably get a bipartisan letter with Republicans saying, please, this would be useful to look at. If that's something that people need to show deans or whatever, I'm sure we can generate that. Just, contact me, and I'll do that with a Republican. But I think it would be great. We really would look forward to your work product, because frankly, we have limited capacity to develop policy in the legislature. We have 10 people that work for me in Washington, 4 do policy, and many people only have 2 or 3 people that do policy. That's every policy under the sun. This takes, even if I was able to have one person who did dedicated tax policy, as you mentioned, and you need a team, the committee has a team both the Republicans and Democrats, but they're not working on this. They're not. They can't take the 20,000-foot thing. They're just working right now on keeping government open and this tax credit and that tax. So, I mean, they're thoughtful, and we would work with them, but it would be great to have an outside team, so I'd be happy to facilitate that. Yes?
Congressman, thank you for coming. My name is Rebecca Taylor, and I serve at the State Department. So my ears pricked up when you were optimistic about those 3 trade agreements being passed. Is there something specific that's happening now that gives you that optimism?
They have not passed because the president hasn't sent them to us. They would have passed last session. They would have passed this session. The math is extremely simple. 90 to 95% of the Republican caucus supports them. 30 to 50% of the Democratic caucus supports them. Somebody somewhere made a decision that we want to be closer to 50% of the Democratic caucus, so there's a lot of arm twisting and whatever, but they would pass with 30% of the Democratic caucus. They would have even passed under a Democratic majority with 30% of the Democratic caucus. And now they don't even need a single Democratic vote. They would sail through with Republican votes, but they're still going to have 30 to 50% of the Democratic caucus joining them. So there is never, let me be clear, and I've said this, there's never been any question of the votes for these in the House or the Senate for the free trade agreements. They would pass regardless of control of Congress. So, as soon as you bring it down and people need to be recorded, you got 90 to 95% of Republicans and you got, 40% of Democrats that right now are there. And, we can delay it more and try to get to 50% of Democrats, but they have plenty of votes to pass. Yeah. And I've whipped these trade agreements. So I mean, we even have it's not that we have a whip operation, it's not the Democratic whip operation. It's kind of the New Dems, and it's a side whip organization. But we know the votes on our caucus on these trade agreements too. And obviously the Korea one will get more votes, and Panama second, and Colombia third. But they will all pass.
I actually come from the startup world, and I chose to serve for a year or 2 here. And so I'm very interested in if the world were perfect and things went your way, what is the one most important change you think needs to be made besides dropping the rate to benefit startups?
Immigration, frankly, major detriment to American competitiveness in the human capital front. I mean, obviously in the medium and long-term education reform, but immigration now, there are founders of companies every day that some will be the next Google, and obviously some will be out of business in 2 years, but they are not starting in this country because the founders simply don't have a visa category that they can come here with. So that's the number one detriment today. I mean, you look at venture-backed companies in Silicon Valley, and I think the statistic is something like a third of them are founded by foreign nationals, and those are the ones fortunate to be able to be here. But there are companies being backed overseas every day that would, of their preference, rather be here. But they cannot be here because their founders can't get here legally.
There's like one, maybe 2 more questions, and then we'll let the Congressman get back to the House.
Hi, Congressman. I'm Jonathan Altmans with the Kauffman Foundation. I wanted to pick up on your question about the immigration issue. You're probably aware of the fact that we've put that in our Startup Act, and we've certainly suggested that this is one of the many revenue-neutral measures that Congress could do to help startups. Can you give me a sense as to why there's so much reticence on behalf of particularly maybe the Judiciary Committee? Because when I've talked to the leadership in the House and the Senate, they're like, yeah, this is a no-brainer. Is it because we just can't take this issue away from the broader immigration debate, that we can't just talk about the idea of helping very smart people who come here and get PhDs be allowed to stay here and create jobs?
And, it's very easy to do in a better than revenue neutral way, because many of these things can simply have fees or surcharges associated with them. You can easily, and when I say easily, without any pushback from or any drag economically, raise several $1 billion over 10 years from simple immigration mechanisms that actually bring in money, not to mention the taxes paid by the new immigrants, and those aren't necessarily included in the projections, but just from direct fees generated to government. The traditional impasse, and I think, again, there's some blame on both sides of the aisle. On this particular one, more of the blame will be on the Republican side of the aisle. But the particular impasse is you have some Democrats who will say, until we can do everything and allow the mother not to be deported from the kid and taken away and do something about the 15. We're not going to do anything until we can do everything. And obviously, I support doing everything as well. And you have some Republicans who say until we get rid of every illegal immigrant, have a wall on the border, until we secure the border, which whatever that means, some moving target, secure the border, have no illegal immigrants. I'm not talking about allowing any more immigrants in any category anywhere. And so that's the impasse that you have. So you would have, again, both bipartisan support and bipartisan opposition to an initiative like this. But for many Republicans, it's very difficult for them to even talk about anything. If you saw the debate last night, or the Republican debate, I mean, the immigration framing, they're kind of pounced on by some of their base if they ever do anything that smacks of having more people here. In fact, they're quite the opposite. They talk about deportations and more border security.
Should we make this the last question?
Last question.
I'm Mike Nelson, and I wanted to ask a little bit about intellectual property, because the last panel is going to be primarily on that topic, intellectual property and innovation. And I was curious, just a couple days ago, there was a new Harvard study that indicated that more than $500 billion is lost because of the patent trolls and the lawsuits that result as big companies are sued by small companies and by the patent trolls. The interesting thing about the study was that they didn't find that money was being transferred from big companies who were stealing the ideas of little companies. The money wasn't being transferred to the little companies. It was just kind of disappearing, mostly going to lawyers. I'd be interested to know if you have any thoughts on how we can fix the patent system where the same idea is being patented 5 different times, so 5 different companies are all suing each other and blocking some of the innovation that needs to drive this economy.
Well, I've been on all sides of that. I have several patents. I'm an inventor. We've been gone after by if you're being gone after, the people going after you are frivolous trolls. If you're going after somebody else, of course, you're the justified inventor, and they're copying you. So I've been on all sides of that one with different companies. Fortunately, we've avoided. I mean, and obviously, it's in everybody's interest to avoid these trials and these ridiculous things. I mean, usually you can. I mean, frankly, if a troll comes after you and you can pay them $50,000, you usually do it. But it's a problem, and again, there's no simple solution. This recent patent bill was not any kind of real solution to that. In fact, unfortunately, I wound up opposing it quite strongly because of the fee diversion issue. And I haven't verified this, but a member told me yesterday that it took all of 5 days for fee diversion to occur, contrary to the promise. It's actually in this current continuing resolution. So President Obama just signed it, and I guess 5 days later, we're already diverting fees. So that kind of validates why I opposed it. That would have been a start, obviously. Capacity is an issue. I mean, innovation is so different than when the Patent Office was set up. And frankly, I really think we need the brightest, best people to rethink our patent policy. We still fundamentally have a system that's set up for the mechanical era, not the digital era and the biological era. And we've just slapped together a series of precedences and arbitrary decisions that have tried to make the digital and biological era fit with the mechanical era, but it really calls for a new approach. I'm not smart enough to outline that for you today, but I would assemble a blue ribbon panel. You would have the best and smartest people, put people that just have the specific special interests not in the room, but I mean everybody there would need to have a holistic approach and say, what should an intellectual property framework look like for the 21st century and beyond? And you obviously don't want intellectual property protections to be a moving target. You can't change it every 10 years, every 20 years. You can't do that. But once a century, it really makes sense to sit down and rethink it. I mean, we're dealing with 1913 stuff here, and people trying to figure out, there was no such thing as digital or biological innovations when this stuff was put together. And maybe there's a subset of mechanical innovations where the stuff still works, but I mean, you just need a different approach, and that would provide less drag on the economy, which all the fees exiting to lawyers are, and also provide a better mechanism for innovators to be properly rewarded, but also for innovations to be properly disseminated. So, any role that I can play in trying to get together some kind of panel. Again, that's kind of the outside job, but I'm happy to try to furnish bipartisan letters talking about why this is important or something. I'm pretty sure I can get somebody else to sign on to that, but somebody needs to take the ball and run. And with that, I need to take the ball and run. We need to go back to the Capitol. This sounds like an exciting day. I wish I could be here for the IP panel. It sounds wonderful, as well as many of the other panels, but it's great to see such a huge group and our millions of web viewers. Good morning. My goodness, it's early in the West Coast. Those guys are tuning in early. It's 7 in the morning there. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. I hope this is the first of many visits here to the Woo-Woo Center here.
Woo-woo, always happy to come by. This is the one you wanted to give me, right?
Yes, right.
Okay, thanks.
Well, thank you again. May I ask the first panel to join us here on the stage? I think I was going to have you do cleanup. Okay. Then start with Professor Von Villian, then Professor Nelson, and then Professor Jarbo.
Should I put these in that order, or?
We are fortunate to have three very distinguished speakers joining us on the first panel here to take a broad look at the question of innovation and entrepreneurship. I've asked them to start with Professor Bonvillian here first, and then Professor Nelson and Professor Jarbo. We have three real intellects up here on the stage, and you have their biographies in your hands there. I'll be brief in my introduction. Let me start with Bill Bonvillian. Bill has a distinguished career in both law, the executive branch, the legislative branch, working with key senators. He really was a force for introducing a number of innovations, the Nanotechnology Act. We have ARPA-E in no small measure thanks to Bill Bonvillian. He has gone on now to be the principal representative for Massachusetts Institute of Technology here in Washington, and he is also twice a professor, if I'm right, at both School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins here in town and also at Georgetown, where he teaches a mix of innovation and looking at innovation focused on energy. Our second speaker, Mike Nelson, who you heard him ask a question that triggered, I thought, quite an interesting response from the congressman. Mike is, again, had a very distinguished career on the Hill. He was a top aide to Vice President Gore, focused on Internet. He's actually the one that invented the Internet, not the Vice President. He has gone on really to work in the private sector. He also teaches at Georgetown. He really is a man of many, many talents. And third, we will hear from Ken Jarbo, who also has a distinguished academic career, also served on Capitol Hill in very senior positions, and has gone on really to help educate all of us about the importance of intangibles in the world of innovation and terms of long-term productivity growth. So I think you could say that we have Mr. Innovation, Mr. Internet, and Mr. Intangibles. That with regard to this panel, you can see that the ayes have it. Bill, let me start with you.
Thanks, Ken. So, Clark, where are my slides on the screen? All right, wait a minute. So which folder? Oh, okay. All right.
It's just encouraging that those of us that talk a lot about technology and innovation often don't really manage it all that well.
It's especially embarrassing when you work for MIT. So, you know, if you talk to the American public about innovation and then you use the word manufacturing in the same sentence, most of them wonder what the heck you're talking about, right? But I thought I'd try that today with this select audience and think with you a bit about, about this manufacturing issue and whether there's actually an innovation opportunity here. Congressman Polis talked about a lot of the policy issue framing for manufacturing, and I'd like to kind of zoom in on the innovation side of it. as we all know in this room, our high-wage, high-cost, advanced technology economy is competing increasingly with low-wage, low-cost, increasingly advanced technology economies. That's a much more complicated competitiveness challenge than the, for example, great competitiveness challenge of the 70s and 80s with Germany and Japan. Those nations were fellow high-wage, high-cost, advanced technology economies. The current competition is much more complicated. Recent analysis of U.S. output levels actually, despite assumptions in standard statistics of a gradual increase, it looks like there may actually be a decline in U.S. output levels. And another underlying issue here is that much of the innovation talent force is dependent upon industrial firms. 60% of U.S. scientists and engineers are employed by industrial firms. So there's a nexus here between these industrial firms and that innovation talent base. And I wanted for you to keep in mind sort of three kind of elements in the U.S. manufacturing sector that I want to spend a little time on. First is, of course, the large multinationals. There are numerous of these in the United States, and they're truly global at this point. A second group are the startup entrepreneurial firms that are pursuing innovation at scale. In other words, they make stuff that can be scaled. And how do they make their decisions about production? And then a third group, and this is the great bulk of the U.S. manufacturing sector. We have some 326,000 manufacturers in the U.S. These are the suppliers, component makers. These are small firms, thinly capitalized, therefore risk-averse. They don't undertake R&D. And that's the great bulk of U.S. manufacturing. And that's always an innovation challenge in particular. So let's keep these three in mind. Let me go through some thoughts about why we need some manufacturing reinvention here, some manufacturing innovation. As we know, success in a highly competitive global world rewards nations that produce complex, high-value goods. World trade in goods is 5 times world trade in services. The overwhelming bulk of our exports are in these complex, high-value goods. The great majority of our imports are the same. So that's where the game is. The game is there, not in services, and that's how you become a successful international economy. Yet the United States, as we know, is running in 2008 a $500 billion trade deficit. And that's a 2008 number. We're right on track to get back there now that we've made some progress in recovery in the manufacturing sector. So we've got a consumption-led economy in the United States increasingly, and we've got, I would argue, a imbalance between our consumption and production sides. That's what some of those numbers tell us. The economists said for years, don't worry about those, mass production commodity goods, just focus on the high-value stuff. Well, we have an $81 billion deficit in high-tech, in other words, advanced technology goods in the U.S., as well as that $500 billion deficit in goods. Economists think, well, we're a service economy, just do it in services. But if you look at the services and goods imbalances, the services is the top line, and we're gradually building that surplus up, but that surplus in service, we're going to have to wait many decades before it overcomes the deficit in goods. So what's that kind of tell us here? For a long time, we had an innovate here, produce here assumption behind our economy. We organized the economy in the post-World War II era around leading world technology advance. We ran innovation wave after innovation wave. We only missed one in the 20th century, leadership of one, which was the quality manufacturing effort that Japan put together. So our operating assumption has been that, we'd innovate here, and of course we'd produce here. And then we would realize the whole chain of gain throughout that system. But I think the innovate here, produce here bonds are beginning to break down. We can't necessarily assume that that's going to occur, and many industrial sectors are now finding ways to be able to sever R&D and design from production. And that has profound implications for the innovation system. Why innovate here if the bulk of the gains, particularly on the employment side, may be elsewhere? So how could we think about reemphasizing production, getting that consumption-production equation back in a little better balance? What are some of the elements we would have to think of? Now, the congressman spoke about the policy framework, and I do not want to underestimate that. There are very important macro as well as micro policy elements, but I want to talk particularly here about the kind of more innovation side of this and the kinds of things that we might undertake. I think the first thing to do is to think about some of the historical lessons when there have been shifts in manufacturing leadership. How does that happen, right? And particularly, how does that happen in a U.S. context? I don't want to go through any details on these, but several examples are U.S. takes industrial leadership of the Industrial Revolution in the middle of the 19th century by doing interchangeable machine-made parts, right? That was a staggering advance that took 20 years of investment by the War Department to try and figure out how to make the first generation of machine tools to do, for then, very precise manufacturing, right? And that was the technology advance that led to U.S. leadership of an industrial revolution. It was a technology base. Now, of course, that's not the only thing that happened. We put that into process, and we put business models around it. So technology alone, and I'll emphasize this again and again, is not enough. It's got to be combined with process and business models. Japan in the 70s and 80s taught the U.S. a huge lesson in manufacturing. They developed the core technologies and the processes and the business models around quality manufacturing. And it was a pretty unpleasant time between 73 and 92, as Kent Hughes' book is the authoritative source on. Missing an innovation wave in manufacturing turned out to be pretty painful. We responded by bringing on the IT revolution and then the biotech revolution, and that was kind of the way we got out of that box. But nonetheless, it's an important lesson to us. We responded in one particular sector in semiconductors with a very interesting technology-based response. So leadership in manufacturing in a U.S. context can shift based upon a core technology series of advances. If we were to think in the current context, right, the context of present-day manufacturing, what are the productivity-yielding paradigms in manufacturing that could be stood up? This is potentially a long list. These are some territories where new paradigms could be stood up. But the goal here is that if we're going to compete against low-wage, low-cost, advanced technology economies, the only move we've got is through significant new efficiencies and productivity gains. That's the only way we're going to stay in this game, right? So macro policies may encourage those, but you also have got to look on the ground in the plant to figure out what those new paradigms might be. And this is a working list of some of those that various people are considering. Just doing some new technology paradigms doesn't do it. You have to pursue paradigms that actually fill a matrix. You want to get new paradigms that will actually affect substantial areas of the economy. Pursuing one sector's innovation advance, it's important, but wouldn't it be nice if we could launch some innovation advances that build synergy across the entire industrial spectrum, at least a decent part of it? So this is an attempt at looking at major sectors of the U.S. economy, from biopharma and aerospace to IT and electronics to heavy equipment, and then new sectors like the whole digital side, transport, energy, and then some of the potential paradigms from network-centric manufacturing, advanced materials, and nano, and mass customization, distribution efficiency. How do they play across those parts of the economy? And there's pretty good coverage. So I think that's a factor we have to think about if we think about innovation strands. And of course, manufacturing is no longer manufacturing, right? We have a whole different generation of companies coming about in the 21st century. Ken will talk about some of this. But we need to look at what are the emerging firm models. And I think by and large, that's a deep integration of manufacturing with services, explored by companies, for example, like IBM 15 years ago. That's the standard model. So you have to think about manufacturing in a much deeper context of allied with services, which may be vertical and may be horizontal. So business models are going to have to look at the optimal combined model. Now, one of the reasons why manufacturing and production remains important is if that's the 21st century firm, then you've got to have a production component of that firm to be fully successful. It's that integration that becomes key. There is a huge amount to be learned from other economies. We can't just look from within. The other economies are pursuing these technology strategies as well. We're not the only ones sitting around starting to think about this. Many are far down those roads. And there's several key categories here: China, India, Brazil, large emerging economies; Germany and Japan, large established economies, and interestingly, are high wage and high cost like the United States, but are running major manufacturing surpluses. What are they doing, right? What's that story? Korea and Taiwan, smaller scale, more niche-oriented economies just because of their size, but they are significantly expanding manufacturing employment and pursuing advanced manufacturing with zest. So I want to think with you for a minute about the connection between R&D and production in the three kinds of industrial sectors we were talking about before. In the last 25 years, we've learned a great deal about how to do distributed production. With IT advances, we have figured out how to do IT-based specs that can feed into computer-driven machine tools and IT-based software that essentially unifies production in substantial economic sectors and enables it to occur worldwide. The iPod is the perfect example. You can actually stand up a whole production system using contract manufacturing and IT-based specs in a matter of half a year, right? You don't have to go out and worry about buying the greenfield, building the plant, getting your OSHA permits, taking 7 years before you get to the production stage. You can do it very quickly through this capability. Therefore, we can do distributed manufacturing, and we pursued it significantly. It's particularly relevant in the IT sector, but it looks like there are other sectors where that's not going to work, right? So in IT and biopharma, it looks like you can do this distributed manufacturing model because you can sever R&D and design from production. But there's a lot of other stuff, right? There's a lot of very complex electromechanical aero goods where it appears that you've still got to tie R&D and production very closely, right? They've got to be very integrated. Those goods are of such complexity, they're full systems in a way, that you need to have an integration of the two. There's an issue here. If you offshore production, then in those sectors you may have R&D and design follow that, right? So that's another underlying perspective here. This model is not well tied to the introduction of innovation. So we run parallel systems in the United States as usual. We have a system for incremental advance that's dominated by large firms who do great, engineering work and great product introduction, and they work on a kind of a demand response kind of model. They identify niches and then re-engineer product lines to fit those emerging market niches, right? This is an induced innovation model. But then we have a completely different model for more radical and breakthrough innovation. We have, small entrepreneurial firms and startups, and we have a system for financing that from angels to venture capital to IPOs. That sector has been predominantly organized around the IT sector. It's used to being able to get in and out of a firm in about 5 years. So you can't be much more than 2 years from production, and you can't, and you got to be able to do an IPO and get your investors out within a total of about 5 years. There are a lot of sectors that aren't like that, right? The next innovation waves may be in sectors that aren't like that. Energy is not like that. It's going to call for a much deeper capital commitment, and it's going to call for a much more longer-term investment. The innovation, radical innovation model that we've got doesn't fit. And guess what? It doesn't fit manufacturing either. So if we want to think about innovating in manufacturing and using that entrepreneurship startup model to bring on new technology paradigms, we have some real attention we've got to pay as to how that stand-up process is going to occur. And again, to tie that back to the kinds of firms we've got, the multinationals, they're in fine shape, right? And they're going to respond to competitive cost competition by locating where they need to worldwide. And where they need to, they will locate R&D close to the production when that nexus is needed. The entrepreneurial startups that are trying to make stuff and scale it, they're not going to be able to get VC funding that is going to reflect advances in manufacturing technology, probably. The attitude of VCs is, hey, manufacturing production, that's not your core competency. Your technology is your core competency. Stand it up quickly, offshore that production, reduce your risk and cost. You know, pretty sensible advice. The price here is that there's a substantial risk of product control over time and a huge potential knowledge spillover, right? So in a way, it's an inherently pretty risky strategy, and it means that the next generation of technological advance will not necessarily occur on the production side in the U.S. and further the split between production and the innovation system, in turn affecting the depth and capability of the innovation system. And then there's the small manufacturers, the bulk of U.S. manufacturing, as we discussed before. They need productivity gains to stay competitive, right? This is the overwhelming bulk of U.S. manufacturing. They're going to have to find ways to introduce very significant productivity gains on an ongoing basis. They lack, you know, they're thinly capitalized, as I said before, risk averse, don't undertake R&D. We're talking about firms that employ 50 people or less predominantly. They don't have the test beds to be able to test out new manufacturing technologies. They don't have the financing capability to stand up new integrated technology systems. How are they going to respond? What's the future going to look like for them? So what's at stake here, I would argue, is the hourglass. So when we think of manufacturing, when we think about the narrow part of the hourglass, which has about 11 million production jobs in it. So, you know, scholars look at that total that comes out of the Labor Department. Some of there's only 11 million people here. Don't worry about it, right? I mean, there's many more in healthcare. What's to worry? The problem is that there's an hourglass here. In other words, that production moment, the narrow part of the hourglass, actually reaches and affects pretty deeply into the larger sides of the hourglass. So in the top part of the hourglass are resources, suppliers, components, right? That's huge. They flow into that production moment, and then out of the production moment flows an entirely different set of systems, the distribution, sales, life cycle, maintenance, repair, that whole world, largely services, right? Through that whole hourglass are very complex value chains, right, that combine into these complicated networks, the production moment with the two parts of the hourglass that are dependent upon the production moment. So when you take away the production moment, you have a profound effect on the value chain on both sides. So we're not talking about, we don't measure this. We have no idea how big those value chains are. But those 11 million jobs are not 11 million jobs. There's many more out there. Now, we do take a look at, you know, job multipliers. You know, the job multiplier in manufacturing is larger than in any other. It's somewhere in the range of about 3 to 1, high twos, 3 to 1, broadly across the economy. In advanced technology sectors, interestingly, it appears to be significantly higher. So in semiconductors, it may be 15 to 1. There may be 15 people on either side of that hourglass for each production line employee. So these value chains are big. The consequences of losing that production moment is significant. When you pull that out, it's very hard to stand up, particularly the part of the value chain on the top, which, by the way, also includes the whole innovation system, right? Engineering and scientists and your R&D system. When you pull that production out, you may be able to restore with a different product line the distribution, sales, life cycle stuff. But it's very disruptive, and you probably don't restore it at the same scale. So I think that we need to grapple with this hourglass problem if we're going to understand production. And then we've got to begin to think about the underlying issues for those three sectors of manufacturing. The multinationals, and I'm not too worried about how well they're going to do. But the entrepreneurial and startup firms that could potentially bring on innovation ways for U.S. manufacturing, it's going to be their job to do it because they do the breakthrough advances, not the induced incremental advances. How are they going to cope with this manufacturing moment? And then thirdly, what's the effect going to be on the great bulk of U.S. manufacturing, those 300,000 manufacturers that are out there spread across the country in a pretty dense way that in turn create the bulk of this hourglass? So those are the thoughts I wanted to leave you with on innovation in manufacturing. I could say a few words later about a new initiative that's being stood up that's co-chaired by my president, Susan Hockfield at MIT, and Andy Liveris, author of a very interesting new book on manufacturing, who's CEO of Dow, called the Advanced Manufacturing Partnership, which is being undertaken in cooperation with NIST and NSF and the Department of Energy and DARPA and DOD, and includes, as a steering committee, 12 major firms from widely varying sectors, and then includes 6 leading research universities, and there's going to be an attempt to build that and do a lot of idea collection around some of these issues. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Bill.
So I think
I don't have slides, so I knew better than to bring slides because I found out that Bill was speaking before me, and I thought, well, this is going to be completely redundant because I worked in the Senate on innovation at the same time he was, part of the time he was there. I'm a professor, been a professor at Georgetown like Bill. I have an MIT PhD, so I think like MITers, just like Bill now thinks like an MITer. So I thought, well, what am I going to say differently? And then I started looking at what I could talk about, and I realized I actually had 5 different speeches I could give. And as a professor, that means 5 times 55 minutes. So I won't do that. Instead, I'm going to talk about just a few provocative ideas and set up some questions which the second panel might want to grapple with and that we can talk to in the Q&A. In the program, it says I'm a professor at Georgetown. I've been doing that for the last 3.5 years, and I'm still teaching classes on technology and policy as an adjunct faculty. But my main job is currently as a research associate at the CSC Leading Edge Forum, which is a small think tank, mostly based in London, working on information technology trends and helping understand how they will affect the way business and government function. It's a really fascinating group of people, very low profile, but they work with about 120 of the Fortune 500 companies around the world, and it's been a real joy to work with them. I'm also an independent consultant, and I should say that what I say today is my views has nothing to do with Georgetown or with CSC and the Leading Edge Forum. Should also make my political leanings very clear from the very start. I am a cyber libertarian Democrat. We have our own Facebook group. It's a growing movement. We have 65 members so far. This group consists of technological optimists who believe that the technologies that we've been building over the last few years, particularly the internet and the cloud, can transform the way we run government and make it much easier for innovation, for entrepreneurship, and for the creativity that we're all trying to foster. I'm also a raging centrist and a radical moderate, which means I really would like to see some of these technologies used to change the way government functions and to see policies that will open up opportunities for innovation using the technologies I'm going to talk about. Also, if I can take just a second for a commercial, this afternoon between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock over at the George Mason Law School in Arlington, the Telecommunications Policy Research Conference is meeting, and I'll be chairing a fascinating panel on the overlap between telecom policy and innovation policy. And so if you are interested in what I'm talking about for 10 minutes, you can go across the river this afternoon and listen to some very smart people talk about the similar topics for 2 hours. It should be a very interesting session, and I hope some of you can make it. I've been working in government and in the private sector trying to influence policy for more than 20 years. And I'm very grateful that on my very first day on the job, when I was working for Senator Gore, my mentor, Pat Wyndham, who many of you probably have worked with in the past, sat me down and told me the most important thing I needed to know about working in Washington. He said, Mike, always have a good bumper sticker. Since I don't have 5 hours to talk about everything I want to talk about, I'm going to try to give you some good bumper stickers. To have a good bumper sticker, you need good buzzwords, and you only get 4 or 5 syllables for that. So I'll give you a few buzzwords. And again, these are ideas that I want to provoke some discussion later, and I'll be happy to talk with anybody who wants to talk about them, either in person or online. My email address is mnelson@pobox.com, and I guess that's very 20th century now. So like the senator, like the congressman, I will tell you that you can find me on Twitter @MikeNelson. Very easy.
Let me say that Mike introduced me to a new concept. He offered to provide a Twitterduction to help save time.
Your entire life in 140 characters. If you're interested in bumper stickers, by the way, great new book, Microstyle, The Art of Writing Little. Written by a linguist, tells you how to write good tweets, good crisp PowerPoint presentations, and most of all, how to win political debates with good one-liners at Republican debates. Okay, so let me give you some buzzwords, and then I'll dig into each of them and see if I can provoke some good questions. But before I do that, I want to correct Kent. I didn't realize I was going to be Mr. Internet. So I'm going to be Mr. Internet and Mr. Ideas and Mr. International. So the I's still have it. Okay, so a couple themes. First of all, since I am Mr. Internet, I'm going to talk about the cloud. No surprise. And particularly the cloud of things. What happens when you're able to connect together billions of different devices and collect information from all of them. I'm going to talk about transparency. I'm going to talk about ecosystems. I'm going to talk about idea flow, net speed, double deep, and the world brain. So 2 minutes on each of these. First off, I think we've heard a lot about the cloud in recent days. This is a fundamental transformation of how we do computing, and it's opening doors to entrepreneurs, not just in this country, but around the world. If you go into a VC in Silicon Valley today, and you provide a proposal that includes any money for capital expenses on equipment, you're asked to leave. Your capital expenses, if you're a startup in Silicon Valley today, are laptops for each employer, cell phones for each employer, and a coffee pot. Because all the computing you need to do will be done in the cloud. You will just rent the storage, you will rent the web hosting, you'll rent the computing capability and the software from services like the Amazon Compute Cloud, Microsoft, Google. There's no reason to have to buy a bunch of servers. In the dot-com bubble, we saw what happened when the startups bought a bunch of servers, went out of business, and then had to sell all the servers for 5 cents on the dollar on eBay. That doesn't happen anymore because now I can do with $2 million what startups spent $20 million doing 10 years ago, simply because I can use the cloud. If we had 5 minutes, I could sit here and in 5 minutes use a credit card, sign up with Amazon, and create a website on the cloud. And not just any website, but a website capable of handling 100,000 customers an hour. That's the kind of capability we have with the cloud. And because we have this new way to move more quickly, we're going to face hyper competition around the world because every person with a good idea is now going to be able to get access to these tools. Cheaper ways of doing computing, more importantly, less complicated, faster ways of doing computing. So that's where I start, and I spend about half my life explaining what a total transformation we are going through and what that will mean. The cloud is going to be as important as the web, probably a lot more important. Second issue I'm working on right now is transparency. I'm doing a report for the Leading Edge Forum called Creating Your Transparency Strategy in the Age of WikiLeaks. It's all about how companies can take the data that they are collecting as part of their normal operations, take information on their personnel, take information on their strategy, and share it with a broader audience. most companies today still, there's 3 types of information. There's the really secret stuff, like financial results that can only be released under certain circumstances or else you get thrown in jail by the SEC. Some of and with that, the super secret stuff in some cases includes intellectual property or trade secrets, like the Coca-Cola formula. Then there's almost everything else. Internal communications, sales figures, research projects. It's all internal, it's all confidential, you all want to keep it in-house. And then there's press releases. But some smart companies are realizing that in that treasure trove of information, the routine stuff, is a lot of information that should and could be shared very productively with the rest of the world, or at least with partners, customers, and the like. And so this is sort of a theme that we're seeing develop. The word transparency is appearing in press a lot more over the last 2 years than it did before. It's not just about being transparent and open in a fuzzy way. It's about actually providing real data. And today, the last few days, I've been up in New York for Tim O'Reilly's conference called Strata, all about big data and how companies are taking all this data, sharing it, processing it, and doing exciting things to make their company more transparent, generate buzz, enable new products, and most of all, to foster collaboration. Because the best one-sentence definition I have for innovation is collaboration, because that's the prerequisite. So that leads me to ecosystems, which are enabled by transparency and the cloud. We're not talking now about company versus company. One of my colleagues at the Leading Edge Forum, Simon Wardley, just did a blog post that's getting a lot of buzz in the IT arena called Ecosystem Wars. Just a one-page blog post with some very nice diagrams talking about how the little guys are now mobilizing ecosystems around them to take on the big guys. You don't have to be a 1,000-person company or a 10,000-person company to go head-to-head against a 20,000-person, 20,000-employee incumbent. If you can get out there with a piece of software or a tool that 100,000 people are using, or better yet, 5 million people are using, you've got market power. You've got publicity. You've got the ability to attract the best people on the planet to work for you. And his blog post, I think, is definitely worth reading because it moves us to this new world of ecosystem versus ecosystem. To make those ecosystems work, we have to have better idea flow, not just within the U.S., but globally. And I think the congressman gave what I think was the best analysis, the best 5-minute analysis of what's wrong with America's patent system that I've ever heard from a congressman or a senator. We've got serious problems with how the patent system works. We've all talked about that, but it comes down to a fundamental problem that the same idea is getting patented 5 or 6 times. You just have to write the words differently. The problem is that then enables 5 or 6 people to all sue each other, and patent attorneys are very expensive. So we're going to have to do something about the way patents are granted. We're certainly going to have to do something about the way they're reviewed so we can keep things out of the court and avoid having the phony patents that we see today. It's not just about patents, though. It's about copyright. I've had the privilege for the last 3.5 years of being a professor at Georgetown, which means I get to be inside the idea bubble. We have libraries. We get access to all the reports that are published in the research journals because we have licenses for all the very expensive journals as part of our big databases. A small little entrepreneur can't get access to a lot of those papers. They have to pay very high prices even to get a single copy of a single article. That's hindering sharing. But worse than that, I think copyright is also making it more difficult to build the compilations of information that really are needed to train the next generation. Something's wrong with our copyright system as well as with our patent system. I think the Founding Fathers had this one right. They said 14 years was the ideal term for copyright. Today's economists say 10 to 14 years. Certainly, life is changing. Progress is moving a lot faster than it did back in the 1780s. it doesn't make sense that copyright is now on its way to infinity. Net speed is a buzzword I threw out there just to describe the pace at which innovation and implementation has to occur today. And because of the hyper competition, because of these new ecosystems, because of the capability of the cloud, companies can't innovate and then take a year and a half or two to get to the market. And many of the things that slow American companies down are ones that are under our control. There are regulatory requirements, there are patent problems, there's a lot of issues that we have to address if we're going to move at net speed. A very good report that just came out in August, there are actually two good reports on the cloud and what America has to do to take advantage of it. Some of you have probably seen both of these reports, but I'd commend them if you haven't. One is by the Cloud 2, number 2 Commission at the Tech America Trade Association. They gathered together about 70 vice presidents from about 70 companies, about 300 high-level people, and in the course of about 6 months provided a very nice compendium of what we need to do to move more quickly, to use the cloud and to foster innovation. And in addition, CCIA, the Computing and Communications Industry Association, did a similar report just about 3 weeks before. Didn't get quite as much publicity, but that goes even more detail about what needs to be done to allow us to move at net speed. Let me finish with two more thoughts. One is about double deep and the need for employees who are double deep. They're not just specialized in one thing. When I was at MIT getting a PhD in geophysics, I was told that it was my goal in life to be one of the world's top 3 experts in my sub-specialty. And then the price of oil went from $45 a barrel to 10, and the need for anybody in any geophysics specialty went to 0. So I came to Washington.
Last resort.
And I got Potomac fever, and I'm still here. But the convenient thing for me is that forced me to become double deep. I had already developed a deep understanding of how science was done, and I had enough lingo in a lot of different fields to communicate with people in various aspects of research. But then I learned the policy process. After I finished up at the White House, I went off to IBM, spent another 10 years learning how policy and business interrelate. So I'm really sort of triple deep. At Georgetown, I've been teaching at the Communications Culture and Technology program. It's a master's program, about 140 students. They're all trying to be at least double deep. They're trying to understand the sociology, the economics, the political science of technology. They're looking at how technology impacts society and how society shapes technology. Those are critical skills if you're trying to get a product to market, if you're trying to design something that's actually going to be sold not only in the U.S. but around the world. So we've got to look at ways to change our educational system so that we have more of these people being produced. Unfortunately, most of our systems, most of our government programs are still discipline by discipline. And I can tell you, as being somebody who's taught in a multidisciplinary program at Georgetown, if you're not solidly in the middle of one discipline, you're treated like an orphan. You're kind of out there in this old, kind of experimental space, and to its credit, Georgetown has created this experimental space. But it's hard to get grants because everybody will say, oh, that's interesting work, but you need to talk to those people. So let me finish with some thoughts on the global brain. And I use a phrase that Tim O'Reilly used on Wednesday up in New York. How many people know Tim O'Reilly? Tim is the head of a company that publishes the very best technical manuals and a lot of really excellent guides to how technology is to be used, and also a deep thinker. But he gave a talk at the end of this big data conference that was really big picture, and it talked about how we are building a global brain. We are getting this data and this platform of technology that will tie together innovators around the world and allow them to tap into the tools they need, the data they need, and most importantly, the people they need. What the problem is we need to change the cultures that are holding back that development. And let me finish with a quick overview of what I see as the 3 cultures of technology around the world, and leave it to you to figure out how we reconcile them. When you look at Western Europe, you have a culture of technology that is predominantly driven by the precautionary principle. First, do no harm. The first question you hear when you go to Brussels is, oh, what could go wrong? Let's make sure nothing goes wrong. And with that is a related need to preserve what we've got. So there's a real sense of, we've got incumbents, they pay people salaries, let's not rock the boat. And if you look at Western Europe, the hero is the philosopher. Goethe, Kant, and the active verb, study. As in, let's do another study about that. Here on the East Coast, we have a different tech culture, driven by profit. Now, you would think that would drive innovation, but in some cases, you can make more profit by stopping the other guy from innovating, by preserving your monopoly, by slowing down the competition. So we have armies of patent attorneys suing each other. We have people going to the Hill to lobby for regulations that will stymie the new competitor. We have all these very effective ways to hold people back. Here on the East Coast, the hero is the Winklevoss twins in the social network. In contrast, on the West Coast, the hero is Mark Zuckerberg. And the guiding principle is the prototype principle. In other words, what can we do that's fun? Profits will come, but fun is what it's about. Somehow we need to get those different cultures blended, getting the best of each, so that we can build this global brain and turn that into a global platform for innovation. The U.S. can lead that development and make the biggest, we can expand the pie for everybody if we do the right things, if we lead the world in setting the example. How we do that, I'm not in all these different areas, from taxation to intellectual property to telecom policy to, I'm not sure. But if we identify the goal, we start building towards it, I think we can really make a difference here. I hope I've been provocative, and I look forward to your bumper stickers.
Thank you, Mike. Ken?
I'm going to do this the old-fashioned way.
Nothing wrong with paper point.
Nothing wrong with paper point, exactly. It's always a challenge to go after Bill and Mike, because I'm tempted just to take this, throw it away, and go back to all the great points that they made. I'll try to weave it in a little bit. And I'm glad, Kent, that you got a congressman to start this off, because this actually is the Senate alumni panel. We all know each other from working on the Senate. And I hadn't realized till you did the introductions, it's also the Georgetown panel. Because what you didn't say is I've also been an adjunct professor at Georgetown in the business school. I run a small think tank here in Washington, D.C. called Athena Alliance. And I'm not quite sure we got the bumper sticker right. I'm still playing on that part. And by the way, I'm having trouble tweeting because I find it almost impossible to limit any thought to 140 characters. It's mostly just, go look at this.
That's because you've got big thoughts.
No, I have unclear thoughts that haven't been worked through yet. The advertisement here is it's www.athenaalliance.org, and I write the blog called Intangible Economy, which is www.intangibleeconomy.org. We look at what we call the I-cubed economy. That's the bumper sticker, I-cubed. Information, innovation, and intangible. So again, the I's have it here. So we're sticking with the
Do we have a hashtag today, by the way, Kent?
We do, but I'm not going to give it to you because I really don't follow it. The hashtag is Athena Alliance. So.
And Kent, do we have a?
We'll develop one
for today.
I'm going to rely on the global brain to send some creative suggestions.
So what I want to talk about, and I'm going to get off the script here because I'm going to actually throw in an E instead of the I. I want to talk about innovation, entrepreneurship, we can call it, stretch it a little bit. It sounds like an I. And intangibles, which is my field. First of all, let's start with innovation. First of all, there is innovation, and there's innovation. We like to use a single term for this thing called innovation, but it's really a very multifaceted concept. There's technological innovation, there's financial innovation, and actually, folks, some of the financial innovation is good. It doesn't always seem that way recently. There's marketing innovation, and there's organizational innovation. So there's different types of innovation. So when you think about innovation, you have to think about these different things. There's also different levels of innovation. There's innovation that's brand new to the world. There's innovation that's brand new to the market. And there's innovation that's brand new to the company. And those are very different things. I mean, it's something that's totally unique to the world is we think of as innovation, but a lot of innovation is actually just new to the market or new to the company itself. For example, every school person, every girl and boy in elementary school absolutely knows that Henry Ford invented the automobile and invented the assembly line, right? That's the American mythology. Wrong. He invented neither of those things. What he did is took an invention by others, the automobile, and basically turned it into a product for the masses, for the farm masses, actually. He didn't care about the city people. The Model T was designed to be out on the farm, out on roads that weren't really roads. He didn't invent the assembly line. He took the assembly line from the meatpacking industry. So, but yet those were major innovations because he took something and adopted it to something else and changed the world in doing that. So there's different types of innovation. Then we think about world-changing innovations, things that are totally new to the world. Well, most of those innovations are in fact built on something else. I love to talk about the disruptive innovations in the financial sector that happened in Italy in the 13th and 14th centuries, called banking.
Yeah.
The one slide I usually have is I show an ATM and say, here's the disruptive technology. It changed the world. And then a picture of a Renaissance picture of the Renaissance banker. So a lot of the innovations are, in fact, we like to make the distinction between incremental and breakthrough. A lot of the breakthrough revolutions are, in fact, incremental in nature. They're revolutionary in their impact, but they're incremental in their nature because they've built on something else. Having said that, one other plug here. Last May, we did a conference with the OECD on intangible assets as the new building blocks for economic growth. One of the things that came out of that conference was something that's already been talked about here that Mike mentioned, is the innovation ecosystem is radically changing. Or I should say has already radically changed. I mean, public policy is simply catching up to the fact that it's not the individual inventor, it's not even the closed corporate lab. It's collaboration. Collaboration is the name of the game in innovation nowadays. And has actually been for probably 20 years. Nobody wants to recreate Bell Labs because that's not how you do innovation anymore. Innovation is done in open innovation, it's done by user-driven innovation, it's done by joint ventures, it's done by partnerships like Sematech, and one of the ways I got to know some of these folks originally was when we put Sematech together back in the 80s. Which was not a Bell Labs in the sense that it was a closed system. It was a joint venture from all the semiconductor industries. So what we haven't figured out, though, is how to deal with that in this town. And I think the whole discussion about the patent system is part of that. One of the things that came out of this conference as well was, we still have a patent system that's based on the individual inventor. I mean, patents are filed jointly, yes, but the the paradigm, the underlying structure of the patent system is still based on the individual inventor, and that needs to change. We have a tax policy system that is based on that type of system. We have an access to information system that's based on that type of system. It's all still based on a very industrial model, not an information model. Just to give you one little factoid that I came up with that I recently ran into. I think you all know Eric von Hippel's work on user-driven innovation. He's just published a study in the Sloan Management Review that has some startling statistics. What he's found is consumer-driven innovation, where the consumer either creates the innovation or modifies an innovation. The amount of expenditure on that is a third of what the companies actually spend on creating new products. So it's equal to a third that tinkerers are dealing with in the US. In the UK, it's 1.5 times greater than what companies are spending on consumer product development. So there's a huge activity going on out there that's completely underground as far as policymakers and a lot of business people understand. So there's innovation going on that we don't even recognize as innovation out there, and it's huge right now. Let me switch to entrepreneurship. And again, there's entrepreneurship and there's entrepreneurship. We tend to label entrepreneurship as startups. Well, there's lots of different types of startups. There's the lifestyle startup, the person who wants to be their own boss. The example that gets used by Stephen Blank from California is the surfer dude who opens the surf shop or the dive shop because they want to be their own boss and they want to spend a lot of time surfing or scuba diving. So they do that for their lifestyle. The restaurateur, the Apple apps person who's designing apps, the social media folks. We got a very large group of those folks here in DC, believe it or not. We are a hub of social media innovation going on right now. But a lot of those folks are lifestyle entrepreneurs. They're doing what they want to do. They're doing their passion. They will never be more than 1 or 2 or 3 people shops. Then there's the traditional small business, the deli, the hair salon, the mom and pop corner store, that are all startups originally, but have a very different type of needs, wants, and goals than the lifestyle. Then you've got the born to be big and the born to be flipped. The born to be big is the Google. The born to be flipped, frankly, sounds like what the congressman was doing. The exit strategy is, I'm going to create a hot new technology company, and it's going to be acquired by IBM, by Google. And in fact, so what we have now is an innovation system in the large companies that's being driven by acquiring the small companies. Very few CEOs anymore believe in organic growth. It's a growth by acquiring, and the acquiring comes from those small startup companies and the VCs pushing their exit strategies. Most of the VCs aren't really interested in the next Google. You know, they talk about IPOs as being a great exit strategy and growing the company. What they're really interested in is, in 5 years, is this company going to in fact be bought by Google? And I can get my money that way. So you got to think about those different types of entrepreneurs and how they fit into the innovation chain, and how they interact with the large companies, how they interact with the supply chain, because all of those companies in their different niches are all interacting not only with one another, they're interacting with the bigger companies. And so that ecosystem of collaboration of different types of startups, different type of entrepreneurs, is what's driving the innovation system today. Now let me just quickly go to the real passion here, which is intangibles, and my friends out there are mouthing the words for me. Intangibles is what drives all this stuff. Estimates are that anywhere from 60 to 80% of company value, depending on the company, depending on the sector, is in intangible assets. Intangibles run throughout the gamut of sectors, including manufacturing. I have discussions with manufacturing folks that say, oh, you know, this intangible economy, I'm not part of the intangible economy. I bend metal. I'm as tangible as I get here, right? So you look out, you go out to the factory floor and say, okay, what about the skills of this guy over here? He's a trained machinist, isn't he? Oh, yeah, he's really skilled. Okay, intangible asset. What about the technology that's in that machine? Intangible asset. What about the layout of the factory floor? Intangible asset. What about the key to your business if you're a small machine shop, which is your bidding process? Knowing what number to put on that bid that makes you a profit on the one hand and gets you the job as a relatively lower cost supplier on the other hand. Your process for putting together your bid, probably one of your most important intangible assets. Because without that, you're broke. You're out of business. Intangible asset, intangible asset, intangible asset, intangible asset. Now, what's happening as manufacturing is becoming more of an intangible activity is what Bill talked about, is this fusion of services and manufacturing, okay? The idea that we still categorize the economy as agriculture, manufacturing, and services. At least we've gotten away from calling it primary, secondary, and tertiary. But that's where it came from. But that idea of breaking up the economy as agriculture, manufacturing, services is about as outdated as referring to society as nobility, clergy, and peasantry, which is what we used to do about 1,000 years ago. Services and manufacturing, as Bill's wonderful hourglass showed, are all linked in this huge value chain. You go talk to the folks at Rolls-Royce engines, the people who make jet engines. They will tell you they don't sell jet engines. What they sell is thrust on the back of an airplane. They have a center in England that monitors every one of their engines. Real-time monitoring in flight, because at any one time when there are planes in the air, one of those planes is probably going to get hit by lightning. They're hit all the time. You want to know if you're flying that plane, and you want to know if you own that plane, did that lightning strike do anything to that engine? So when that plane lands, do I need to take that in and take a look at that engine or not? Because you don't want to have to put it into the shop just because the pilot said, well, we got struck by lightning, so go tear the engine down. That takes the plane out of service. You want to know real time whether you have to do anything on that. They're selling a service in the guise of a product. What the German Mittelstand companies are doing, those niche companies that are the best of the best in certain products, mostly capital equipment, what they're doing is selling a service. They're selling their knowledge of that product. And it works because they make the product. And the knowledge is embedded in both the product and in the after service. A lot of places try to split off that after service. You can't quite do it as well if you don't actually design and make the product. If I'm designing the product, I'm making the product, I have a competitive edge on then servicing the project. So it's this strange fusion driven by intangible assets, driven by knowledge. And I'm still working on trying to figure out the bumper sticker here, because you say the knowledge economy, and that has all sorts of baggage. So we're all going to be thinkers. That's wrong. You say the information economy, well, it's all about information flows. Well, that's part of it. You call the intangible economy, and it's the my eyes glaze over. It was, I do remember first coming into some Senate offices in the, about 10 years ago to talk about this stuff, and people said, I don't want to, intangible economy, I don't want to be a part of the intangible economy.
The idea ecosystem.
The idea, but ideas are only part of it, again.
And it's also 6 syllables. You only get 4.
You only get 4. So, because it's not just ideas, it's where the ideas come from, in the customer relations, that user-driven innovation, in your supply chain. A lot of companies have pushed the innovation system back to their suppliers and try to get that. It's the relationships. It's all of those other things that build that ecosystem, the flow of information, the flow of tacit knowledge within that ecosystem that drives innovation and drives what the entrepreneurs do. So as we think about the nexus of innovation and entrepreneurship, keep those 3 things in mind. There are different versions of innovation, and we have to think about the broad set of innovations, not just the latest gadget, or the I like to call it the electronic swizzle stick mentality. There are electronic swizzle sticks out there. We need to think of entrepreneurship in all its multifaceted forms, from the lifestyle guy all the way to Born to be Flipped. And then we need to think of the fuel of all of this, intangible assets, and bring all of those concepts together as we think about this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. We have really run over time, but I want to keep us from our coffee and conversation break for just a minute and open it up for a couple questions for this very erudite panel. Please identify yourself. Good to see you here.
Stefan Richter with The Globalist. If I listen to the Senate Brigade and the collected wisdom,
Could you,
there's nothing that one can disagree with, almost. Let me start by that. What is totally unclear to me is the comeback strategy. Bill talked about 300,000 manufacturing companies that basically have no capital and have not focused on skill. You've talked about the large companies where we read stories that where you say 60 to 70% of all U.S. innovation resides in them. We read stories that the people have now reached the expire by date, and there, as you see by IBM, are largely being replaced by engineers outside of the United States. We've heard about the financing model, and basically have to understand that what we cherish as Silicon Valley was an exception because the U.S. financing model coincided with an IT wave, which is now basically over in terms of the big challenges being environment and energy. We've heard about the new MIT initiative, but it's sort of a throwback to the old, whether DOD-led, defense-led, or corporatist approach of U.S. innovation, which in the world that we now live in of freestanding collaboration also doesn't work anymore. So I see your analysis as entirely on point. I just don't see a single point of light. So help me out.
Let's start with Bill. Your study came up, but I want to have Ken and Mike weigh in on this too. This is a central question that is very much on the country's mind, certainly on the Congress's mind.
Sure. I mean, look, the reason why manufacturing interests me is because, our country is full of these very complex, established, we can call them legacy sectors. And it's very hard to introduce innovation into legacy sectors. There's all kinds of barriers. There are technological, economic, political paradigms that prevail in them, and means that introducing innovation into them is tough, right? But of course, most of the economy is composed of complex, established legacy systems, and a lot of our problems are in complex, established legacy systems like energy. So we might as well figure out how to work on introducing innovation into them. I don't think this is a hopeless task. in a sector like manufacturing, definitely one of these cells. There are, I think, a series of potential new paradigms that could be introduced that could create, based on very substantial innovation efforts that could be transformative, particularly if there's synergies between them. I didn't spend a lot of time laying out what those innovation pathways were. I just threw a list up on the screen. But I think they're there, and I think they could be quite powerful. What I was focusing on are the barriers that have to be overcome to get there. And they're very hard in any complex established sector, right? They are full of barriers. You've got to, in effect, parachute the innovation into occupied territory. The nice thing about doing IT or biotech was they're largely unoccupied territory, right? The stand-up time takes some time. You don't have an existing market there, but at least the barrier system is not nearly as dense. In an established sector, parachuting that technology in to the occupied territory is going to get shot at, right? So that's what makes it a tough problem, but it's also what makes it an interesting problem. If we could figure out how to bring innovation into these established sectors, the economy as a whole would have a significantly improved innovation and growth rate. So that's why these challenges are worth taking on. I think the technology-based paradigms that, again, have to be combined with process and business models are there. The issue is how to get these barriers down. And what I was trying to do today was identify what some of those barriers are. There are strategies for each of these. But part of it is understanding the landscape, and that's what I was trying to get at today in this established manufacturing sector.
Ken or Mike?
Well, I'll talk a little bit about the digital sector. It is much easier to highlight the problems than it is to give the solutions, but I'll focus on two areas of solutions, and if you want the 2-hour lectures on each of them, I'll arrange to do that later. I'm going to focus on, that would be good, I guess, wouldn't it? But I might use some copyrighted material and I'd be sued. And that leads to the first one, which is this whole question of making sure ideas flow better. I really think it's time for a patent revolution like the congressman called for. We just did the evolution. We fine-tuned a broken system, made it better. The patent bill, I think, is helpful, but we really need to do something about the fact that we've got a lot of patents that should never have been granted. And so this means changing the incentive structure so examiners get rewarded as much for rejecting a patent as they do for processing and approving it, and that they're supported when they reject it. It means making it easier for people to challenge patents when prior art wasn't considered properly. It really means getting things out of the courts. It's really outrageous that a startup gets to 5 people and the 6th person they hire has to be a patent attorney. So I think we need to do some fundamental changes there. I think it would be helpful if someone did some studies here and started looking at how different countries deal with this and started racking up the costs involved in our overly restrictive patent system. And so we could get a metric that would allow you to compare Japan to China, to the US, to Germany, to France, to Italy, and really point out on a very clear report card why we're diverting a lot of money to lawyers rather than innovation. This recent study I cited from last week, a $500 billion number, is wakes people up. Maybe a factoid, it may be $200 billion, but you can fund a lot of PhDs or build a lot of infrastructure for that cost. And then the second issue is one we haven't talked as much about, which is transparency. And this is a bandwagon that's starting to move. It's something I'm talking about a lot. I think if we do this right, if we take advantage of all the big data that's developed out there, we can get away from the regulatory structures we have today. And this is, again, a whole 2-hour lecture. But today we're telling companies, we're going to regulate you. You must do things this way. In a few places, we've moved to the next level of regulation, and the Obama administration is talking about this. But that's where, instead of saying you will do things this way, you say to the company, you will reveal the data that tells us exactly what you're doing, and the government, state, federal, local government will be paying attention, your customers will be paying attention, the press will be paying attention. And if you're doing something that's outrageous, if you're doing something that's hurting your employees, if you're doing something that's hurting customers or polluting the environment, that will be detected from the data, and there'll be reaction. That's a different, but this gets us away from having to fill out lots of forms that companies that are doing everything right have to fill out every year, and all the people who are doing all the right things are the ones who are wasting all the time filling out the forms. Transparency, I think, gets us to a better world. So this is, again, philosophical, but I'm a cyber optimist, as I said, but I'm also a cyber libertarian. I think we have to get rid of some of the old rules that try to force people into certain modes of behavior, that reward certain business models and eliminate others. So,
Ken, in the interest of time, let me take the very last question and then have you respond.
This will be 30 seconds. I think the comeback strategy is in the middle market. It's the huge number of those medium-sized companies that have a wealth of intangible assets that are out there that they just haven't tapped into yet. So I think there's a huge potential there, and we're actually trying to put together a project called iCounts, Intellectual Capital Counts, that creates tools to help those small and medium-sized companies tap into those intangible assets. There's a huge productivity gain and innovation gain that can be gained in that part of the market. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you. Peter, let's make this the last question. Introduce yourself, if you would.
Sure. Good morning. Peter Harder. I'm a registered lobbyist. I just spent the past 7 years on the patent bill, which my friend Mike has referred to. Comment and a question. To Mike's point, we need more studies. Well, the patent bill, Section 38, has a new study. This is yet another study on patent litigation. The FTC just completed one at 384 pages after 5 years. This will be done by the GAO, and it'll be conducted over the next 12 months. I don't know if it includes international issues, but Mike makes a good point. Patent litigation is not just in the U.S. We all read headlines about litigation in China, for example, so I don't know if the GAO study will have the scope to go to other markets like China and Germany where litigation is very active. And a question, Mike, the study referred to, is that the September 19th study from Besson and Muir from Boston University?
yeah, I think it was. I think I may have said Harvard, but
Yeah, there were some Harvard folks who commented on it recently. Besson and Muir wrote a book a couple years ago called Patent Failure about software patents. They don't like them. And I read that book, about 300 pages. And this study, which I've read, it's a draft publication. It's not been peer-reviewed. And there's one other author whose name I can't recall, but Besson and Muir have a lot of work in this area on software patents. And the study is explicitly paid for by another group that lobbies on the patent reform issues, the Coalition on Patent Fairness, which are some of the richest, largest tech firms. And Patent Freedom, which is a analytics firm which has studied patent litigation and I would say has a bias for not liking people who assert patents. So I just wanted to clarify what the study was. It's not some definitive, peer-reviewed Harvard study. It is one of many articles that has been paid for and will add to whatever the GAO does with their study and perhaps other studies.
Peter, when I was in the White House working on these issues, we were actively lobbied by the patent community not to have the NSF fund studies like this. There was an active effort to make sure we didn't have good data. So if those professors have to go someplace else to get funding, that shouldn't be held against them. And it shouldn't. I mean, it's pretty insulting to say that because this work was funded by one particular group, the result must be wrong. Even if it's not 500 billion, it's 100 billion. That's a hell of a lot of money. I take offense by that comment.
Well, let me just not stand any more in the way of coffee and conversation, although I'm going to ask you to drink your coffee a little more quickly than you might otherwise. And I do want to note that when we're talking about the global brain, I think we've had a significant part of it here on this panel. And I'm going to invoke a phrase, that 1,000-year-old phrase that Ken Jarboe brought up. I think in describing this group, we can refer to them as part of the intellectual nobility. Please join me in a round of applause for really terrific presentations.